I am Jim Collison, and this is Gallup's Call to Coach, recorded on April 18th, 2022. Call to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you're listening live on our live page, gallup.com/cliftonstrengths/live, there's a link right above me there. It'll take you to our YouTube page. You can join us in chat. We'll be taking your questions live. If you have questions after the fact, you can always send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or right there on YouTube so you never miss an episode. My guest today is Dr. Arthur C. Brooks. Dr. Brooks is a social scientist and a Gallup senior scientist as well, who studies human happiness. He is the William Henry Bloomberg Professor of the Practice of Public Leadership, that is a mouthful, at Harvard Kennedy School, and Professor of Management Practice at the Harvard Business School, now that we got all that out of the way. Also the best-selling author of 12 books and an acclaimed public speaker and creator of the popular How to Build a Life column for The Atlantic, and now the best-selling book From Strength to Strength. Arthur, welcome to Call to Coach.
Hey, Jim. How are you? Nice to see you.
Great to have you here. And my co-host for the interview today is Austin Solentrop. Austin is the Clifton Strengths portfolio manager here at Gallup. And Austin, always great to have you on Call to Coach. Welcome back.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here. I am really looking forward to this. It's a special treat, I know, for the two of us, Jim, to have Arthur here with us. So Arthur, thank you again for taking the time to join us.
Thanks, Austin. It's great to be with you. Great to be talking to both of you about one of my favorite subjects, which is Clifton Strengths.
Yeah,
Awesome.
we're excited about it as well. Arthur, before we get started, I just read your bio, but what else should we know about you, and maybe sneak in your top 5 there as well?
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, everybody's got a crazy biography. Mine actually didn't start with, what you just ended with, which was this 75-word title at Harvard University. We, lots of words. It makes it really important. That's the key thing to keep in mind. Before I was doing this, I was the president of a think tank in Washington, D.C., called the American Enterprise Institute, a public policy think tank. And then I started off my career actually as a professional classical musician. So I left college relatively inauspiciously at the age of 19. So if any of our fellow coaches have any kids that are struggling in college, there's hope is all I can say, because it did take 10 years. My parents called it my gap decade. And I wound up, finishing college in my late 20s, leaving classical music at 31, going to graduate school, getting my PhD, and becoming a social scientist. So it's been a long and winding road, looking for adventures, looking for intellectual adventures, which is fantastic. I'm so interested in new ideas and curiosity about new things, which actually is going to explain my big 5, my 5 Clifton strengths, which are in order. Number 1, futuristic, a high level of what we social scientists call prospection, which is thinking about the future, a clear focus on how things can get better. I'm thinking all the time, what can we do? What can we do that's new? Number 2 is ideation, which is an emphasis on ideas and synthetic thinking. Synthetic meaning you synthesize different ideas and put them into one major idea. The 3rd is strategic, which is a confidence in the ability to solve problems, always thinking about, what the solutions to problems might be. Number 4 is woo, which is, given the fact that I'm at the 96th percentile in extroversion, something I'm not going to flatter myself about that. That's actually not something to brag about at all. But that high extroversion, if you try to use it in the service of other people, can be a good thing. It's what I try to do. It's what I pray that I'll be able to do every day. And a desire to win people over to good ideas, to persuade them to do things that can lift people up and bring people together. And finally, number 5 is input, collecting information and ideas to synthesize and use in all sorts of new ways. So futuristic, ideation, strategic, woo, and input. That sounds an awful lot like a guy who takes his career down to the studs completely every 10 years, which is what I've done.
I love it. I love it, Arthur. That's wonderful. And I think anybody who has paid attention for the last 90 seconds, as you started talking, the woo-ness, as we talk about it, this energy, the thing I've always admired. I've been able to see you present and speak several times, and a passion comes through when you speak that is just undeniable. And so I'm curious, as we get started, what about maybe your life's work, your study, your work led you to write the book you just wrote, From Strength to Strength? What was it that got you excited enough to write this book?
Yeah, so the book From Strength to Strength, it sounds like it's actually based on Clifton Strengths. I mean, From Strength to Strength. It's actually based on the 84th Psalm, where an ancient Jewish blessing is that may you go from strength to strength, from the Psalm Michael el Chayel in Hebrew, and it's a really important thing that you be able to go from one strength to the next strength in your life. And there's nothing that could be more appropriate for Clifton Strength than that blessing. As a matter of fact,
Right.
I mean. But as far as I'm concerned, every Clifton Strengths coach should know, may you go from strength to strength. Because in point of fact, your strengths change over the course of your life. Not dramatically in the case of some psychometric things like we're doing in this context, but in many other ways, you can actually have strengths that increase and decrease over the course of your life. And that's what I was really interested in. I was noticing, I've been noticing over the past 10 years, the trajectory of strivers. And so I've worked a lot with really high performing individuals, people who are just trying to absolutely make the most of their lives. And one of the things that I found is that they tend toward a kind of a curse, which is a struggle when their early strengths start to wane. Now, there's a reason for this. This is called the rise and fall of fluid intelligence. Fluid intelligence is your indefatigable ability to focus, to solve problems, to crack the case on your own largely. And that gets, with practice, with your 10,000 hours, that gets better and better over in your 20s and 30s. It tends to peak around the age of 40 and start to decline. And that's hugely frustrating and even scary to a lot of people. But the good news, there's a second strength curve that comes in behind it called your crystallized intelligence. That's your wisdom, your ability to synthesize ideas, to take other people's ideas and say, here's what they mean. You may not be able to answer questions faster than anybody else, but you'll be able to say which are the right questions to answer. You're a better teacher. You're a better coach. So what you're going to find, my beloved Clifton, Gallup colleagues, the older you get as a Clifton Strengths coach, the better you should get because of your crystallized intelligence. This is a book about how to develop those things, about what gets in the way of those things, and how to actually be happier. For all intents and purposes, the last book that I wrote, From Strength to Strength, is a happiness 401k plan based on the changing strengths that naturally occur in people's lives.
Wow. I love that. This idea of being able to leverage what we know is changing in people, and that there's a structure to understand to it. It's not just an experiential thing. There's a structure and sort of base to it. You talked about strivers and the struggle that strivers have. You describe it sometimes as then almost like they're addicted to success. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like and maybe how to help people deal with that?
So I've looked a lot. I mean, I teach a class at the Harvard Business School called Leadership and Happiness. And it's the most oversubscribed class at HBS because, of course, happiness, free candy, kids, everybody wants it. And so I have 2 sections of 90 and 400 on the waiting list. And what I talk about in this class is not just the way to get happier, but the barriers to happiness that people who are highly motivated, hardworking people naturally get. Now, I'm talking about the clientele for Clifton Strengths here. I mean, there's very few people who voluntarily, there's some people who their company says, you got to take this. And they're like, okay, whatever. But most people who are doing Clifton Strengths on their own, these are strivers. These are people who want to make a lot with their lives, whether they go to Harvard or whether they go to any other university or any other school. They want to take a big bite out of their lives. And this is a wonderful population, but we have to understand the pathologies of this population as well, which is really critical to point out that not everything is perfect. Now, I've studied over the course of my career as a social scientist a lot of the neuroscience of addiction. Addiction is an incredibly interesting behavioral phenomenon because what it is behind it all is a neuromodulator called dopamine. Now, everybody listening to us and watching us right now knows what dopamine is. It's a neuromodulator. It's actually produced by the human brain. It's a neurochemical of desire and anticipation of reward. It's not a pleasure hormone. It's a desire and anticipation hormone. It lets you focus on a goal. And strivers have that big time. This is one of the reasons that strivers have to be more careful about smoking, more careful about drinking, more careful about gambling, more careful about all of the addictive things. You will find that when you talk to strivers, they're more likely to have an addiction in their past, and they have to be careful about an addiction in their future, because we are fellow strivers. We are dopamine monkeys. We love the anticipation neuromodulator. We're just really, really good at making it is the bottom line. Okay, that's one of the pathologies of being a striver. Now, here's the interesting thing. If you're addicted to drugs and alcohol, the world is like, oh man, that's really bad. It's either a character failing or it's a medical problem, but nobody's like, good job, good job. You drank a liter of whiskey today. Good job, brother. No, that everybody's like, that's terrible. You have to solve that problem. But there are addictions that use the same neuromodulator pathways that people congratulate you for. Case in point, workaholism. You work 14, 15-hour days. People are like, yeah, you're super focused, man. You're good. Oh, that's your strength. Your strength is your indefatigability. It's your ability to go on and on and on. They're like, yeah, ask her husband. Her husband's alone at home feeling lonely. That's not a strength. That's a bad thing. You're choosing your 14th hour of work over your first hour with your kids. Don't do that. That's as bad as drinking too much, because it's going to break up your family. It's going to leave people lonely. It's going to be a problem. It is a pathology. Now, behind workaholism, which strivers have in abundance, there's a deeper addiction, which is usually a success addiction. You're early on. A lot of people who are strivers, they grew up in families that treated them as the special one. The kind of objectified the kid a little bit. You get the A's, you get the perfect scores. You're such a hard worker. You're so smart. And they start to objectify themselves. And as they go through life, they're really afraid of failing. Typically, they're really obsessed with succeeding, which is the other side of a fear of failure, typically. And they will work and work and work because they want to get the dopamine is driving them to get the cookie of success, the A's, the jobs, the pay raises, the promotions, again and again and again, hit the lever, get the cookie. And that can just ruin their lives. So one of the things that I do when I'm talking to executives, which I'm doing all the time, they want to know, how do you get happy? I'm a specialist in happiness. And so they say, I'm not happy. The first thing I'm going to look at is their pathology and the psychodynamics of their relationship to success.
Wow. I love that's really, like, I'm sitting here soaking in everything you just said and thinking about it, my own career path, my own habits, my own sort of approach to things. So thank you. Great breakdown with that. Jim, anything you want to jump in here with?
Yeah, Arthur, so as you think about a young executive, let's look at this from both a young and an older executive. What kind of advice do you give? So you've got this hard charging, driving, late 20s, early 30s executive who's trying to get there to get those kinds of things done versus a 50 or 60-year-old executive doing it. What kind of advice can you give for our coaches listening? How do you help them find that balance?
Because so the key thing is to think of your happiness like a portfolio. So the happiness science is actually it's fascinating. It's super interesting. It's the reason I'm obsessed with it and doing it. And about half of your happiness is genetic. Is your baseline happiness levels. And we find this from identical twin studies who are separated at birth and adopted into separate families. They're carbon copies of each other. And you give them personality tests at 40, and you find that between 40 and 80% of almost every personality characteristic is genetic, and 50% of the happiness, which is interesting. So, literally your mother did make you unhappy is basically what I'm telling you. The other half, now that's not dispositive, by the way. That's just your genetic proclivity. There's also switches. And to explain that, I'll explain it this way. That 60% of your tendency toward alcohol abuse is also genetic, but I have this technology that you can control that can turn that to zero. It's this crazy new technology called don't drink, right? My point is, you've got genetic proclivities and you've got behavioral switches. So you need to know your genetics as much as you can so that you can know what behavioral switches. And this is one of the reasons you get a coach, is because you want to change your behavior. The second half, so the first half is genetic. The second half is half circumstantial. So 25% of your happiness is circumstantial. The things that are happening around you, good and bad. You got the promotion, you got the raise, you got married, you bought a new car, you got fired, you went bankrupt, whatever it happens to be, up and down. Those things don't last. Everybody thinks that those things are going to last. Disregard those things to the extent that you can, because they're very, very temporary. There's a lot of science behind that. But the last 25% is permanent and completely under your control. Those are your happiness habits. They give you better circumstances, and they're genetic switches as well, but they directly control 25%. And there are 4 things. You could boil the ocean of 10,000 studies and find a bunch of little trivial things, like you get happier if you do cardio or resistance training. Who cares? Those are little. The big 4 are faith, family, friendship, and work. Those are the big 4. When I say faith, I don't mean my faith. I'm a Roman Catholic. It's the most important thing in my life. Don't get me wrong. But the data say that you need a transcendental walk, whether it's a religion or non-religious spirituality, a meditation practice, or maybe it's just studying the Stoic philosophers. Even if you're an atheist, you need something that will zoom you out from your day-to-day experience. Second is your family life, the ties that bind, that don't break, that you don't choose. God knows you wouldn't choose in many cases. Your friendships, and this is the key thing for strivers. Lots of strivers say, I've got tons of people around me. I got lots of friends, but I'm lonely. That's because they're deal friends, not real friends, which we can dig into in a minute if you want. But the last but not least is your work. Now, the work is what all the strivers over-index on. When I'm talking to one of my Harvard Business School students that's going out, the first thing I tell them in the class, as a matter of fact, is here's the mistake that you're going to make. You have a portfolio of 4 things: faith, family, friends, and work. You're going to over-index on work, and you're going to under-index on the first 3. That's the bottom line. So when I'm working with a young executive, a young striver, I'm like, don't tell me about work. Yeah, I know your work is going great. You're killing it. You don't have to. You wouldn't be in doing Clifton Strengths if you weren't killing it. Tell me about your faith life. Tell me about your family life. Tell me about your friendships, and I'll tell you how to make a strategy that's going to carry you through to the rest of your life. And if you don't do it, it's like putting your whole 401k in Greek bonds. You know, it's like, okay, it might work, but I don't recommend it.
That's wonderful. We, as a coaching community, we love frameworks, and the ability to take happiness and put it into the big 4 you described: faith, family, friendship, and work. That's actionable for us, right? As coaches, to be able to structure a conversation or structure questions that you would ask. Absolutely. Yep. We appreciate that. When you sort of go through your exploration, you thinking about, your career and how you talked about getting sort of a late start after a 10-year a gap decade, as you described. What have been some of those, maybe those aha moments or those experiences you've had that have helped provide clarity around how to adjust maybe your portfolio of happiness? And any sort of experiences or things you could share with us to maybe help give some examples that we can use in conversations with others?
Yeah, more and more coaches are dealing with people who are career changers. And this is something that if you were doing, to begin with, you wouldn't be able to make a living as a career coach 100 years ago, because everybody would go work in the post office and stay there till retirement. That was how careers worked. Even my dad, who was an academic, just like me, and my grandfather was also an academic, but my dad, he went to a college and he became a professor, and then he retired from that job decades and decades and decades later. Is kind of how it works. So, I don't exactly need a career coach to tell me to, sign your contract for another year. That doesn't, and to help understand my dad's strengths under the circumstances, unless he's really trying to change the nature of his job, which actually is really possible and important. But these days, we need to be able to help people move from career to career, to job, to vocation to vocation. And that requires this incredible discernment of strength, some of which, between fluid and crystallized intelligence, is dynamic. It's changing over the course of somebody's career. Some of it is static. I was futuristic early on. I'm going to be futuristic. I'm lying on my deathbed talking about 1,000 years into the future. It's just how I'm wired, right? And so some of this stuff is constant and some of this stuff is actually changing. And we need to be able to help people understand that in the context of the institutions that can make these things manifest, AKA new job, new career, new emphasis, new vocation. What am I going to do in retirement? Whatever it happens to be. That for me was every 10 years. And you could say I have a hard time really focusing, but that's actually not it, because I've just taken the strengths that I have. I came to Clifton Strengths late. I actually, took the Clifton Strengths early on when I was a CEO, before I knew anybody at Gallup. I just knew that I had heard of this, the best possible thing to understand myself and my strengths. I was a brand new CEO. I took it. It helped me a ton. And then later, after I met Jim Clifton, he hooked me up with a coach. And the coach really rocked my world, took it to a next level for me. So I am a true believer in what you guys are doing. And I'm a huge fan, and I recommend it to everybody. I've even administered this to my students at Harvard. This is how much I believe in this thing. So for me, however, what I've done is every 10 years or so, I've gotten into a new environment where I can manifest these strengths that I have and these interests that I have. I really wanted to go as deep as I could into the world of the arts, of beauty and classical music, and learn how to be an excellent performer early on. I found that was kind of played out by my late 20s. So I decided to develop my brain so I could do this intellectually in a different way. I became a researcher. I did that for 10 years. Later, I was actually teaching and talking about nonprofit management. I thought, I wonder if I could actually run a nonprofit. I'm teaching people about nonprofits. So I didn't just go and grab a job. I was selected to be the president of this very big, very old nonprofit. I mean, it was really a foolish decision on the basis of that board of directors, but it turned out okay in the end. I did that for 11 years as a CEO. And then I came back to academia, not just to do what I'd done before, but rather to start this whole empire of good, of lifting people up and bringing them together. At the end of my time as a CEO, I was praying about it, frankly. I was saying, Lord, what do you want me to do? And the answer came back, as far as I could tell, lift people up and bring them together using your ideas for the rest of your life. And so now what I do, I travel around, I write about happiness, I talk about happiness, I do books and columns, I get to do fun stuff like today. Fundamentally, I want to make people happier. And this is everything I do is just a platform for the things that we're talking about here. And so when I talk to people about changing vocation, changing job, I'm saying just find a new platform to do the thing that you're ready to do at this part of your trajectory.
Love it. Great.
We got a great question, I think, from the chat room that will help kind of flush this out a little bit. You said, so could we say that if you know your Clifton Strengths talents, leverage the top talents, manage the blind spots, and then turn them into strengths, will that make you happier? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that we find is when people are playing to their strengths, number one, that's called earning your success. Now, it's important to keep this in mind. There's an ancient, when I say ancient, I mean like 40 years old, in social psych, idea called learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is no matter what you do, things don't depend on the outcome. The outcomes don't depend on your actions. And so you find for good and for ill. So you have experiments where people are, putting coins into slot machines and pulling the levers, and the outcomes have nothing to do with the numbers that are coming up. And people wander away from the machines. They don't like them anymore. They're boring. There's no connection between what you do and what you get. You also find if people are arbitrarily penalized, they become very depressed. That's learned helplessness. The opposite is earning your success. Earned success is just an absolutely reliable source of joy in your work. I don't care if you're a bus driver or a Clifton Strengths coach or a college professor or politician. I don't care. You got to earn your success. You got to achievement, hard work, merit, and be rewarded because you're using your strengths. Not because you have strengths, but that you're using your strengths. That's critically important. So it's true. If you play to your strengths, if you use your strengths to them, if you know them and you use them, you're going to do great. You're going to do better. You're going to get paid more money. You're going to get more promotions. We all know that, but that's boring. The important thing is you're going to be happier about your life because you're going to be earning your success. That feeling of achievement, of merit, of your skills meeting your passions, your strengths meeting your passions. That is really critical. And the second part of being happy in your work is you got to serve others. You got to serve the humans. You got to feel like you're serving your fellow women and men, your sisters and brothers. And if you do that, then you can reliably think that your work is going to bring you joy, even in the most tedious, stressful days, because you're lifting people up. How do you lift people up most effectively? You play to your strengths is the bottom line. If you want to serve your fellow women and men around the world, and if you want to actually feel like you're earning your success, know your strengths and work to your strengths.
Love it. Right. And being able to do that and think about using our strengths every day and applying them to those four categories of happiness, I think gives us a real concrete way to work to make our lives happier, which I don't think anybody listening wouldn't be excited about.
Right.
When in the book, you do touch on a topic that this community I know is very cognizant and interested in, which is the idea of our weaknesses. And what do we do? I mean, the book's got the word strength in it twice, right? So we know you're focusing on strengths, but this idea that you have to be able to deal with your weaknesses and convert them into a strength. So can you talk a little bit about how weaknesses play into this?
Yeah. One of the things and one of the mistakes we typically make is the only reason we want to know what our weaknesses are is so we can avoid them and hide them. But that's a huge lost opportunity for a bunch of different reasons. To begin with, that's kind of a psychological hedonism and an egotism driven thing ordinarily. I mean, the whole idea that I've got these, it's interesting. I'm writing right now my column for next week in the Atlantic. I'm writing about, how people actually think of themselves as a hot mess, but they try to hide it so other people don't see that. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. But my point in the book, when I talk about using weaknesses as a source of strength, number one is to remember that a full life has weaknesses and strengths. A full life has defeats as well as victories. It has sacrifice. It has suffering. And the truth is that meaning and purpose in life come a lot more from suffering than they do from pleasure, even than they do from enjoyment. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind. A lot of my students, they're desperately trying not to fail. They're very afraid of failure, and they're trying to avoid suffering. They're trying to avoid unhappiness. But when you avoid unhappiness, you ironically, you tend to avoid purpose and meaning, your resiliency, what you can do. People, I ask any of the successful people on this call, I say, when did you find what you were really made of as a person and what your purpose was? They'll tell me about something hard, not like that week at the beach. You're going to talk about, somebody died that I loved, somebody broke my heart. I lost a career, I lost a business. And then I really found, the toughness and what I was able to get beyond. So that's number one, is that weakness is a part of life. I'm not telling people to go looking for suffering. Suffering will find you. I'm saying learn from it and use it. The second part about weaknesses is that weaknesses are the unique part of your personality where you can truly connect with other people. When somebody says, what's the best way for Brooks? What's the best way for you to connect with somebody? I'm like, I teach at Harvard. That really makes me a man of the people, right? I mean, that's not right. It's like, I think it's great. I love it. I'm really happy for it. I'm really, truly grateful for it, but it doesn't connect me to anybody. What it does is it establishes a sort of credibility. It's a platform that I can use. What connects me emotionally with other people, which leaders need to do, is the fact that they have the same feet of clay. They have the same foibles. They have the same fears. One of the things that when I talk about, because I've studied this extensively, is when leaders are in a time of crisis and their workforce is really afraid, is they need to do two things. They need to show the people who are afraid that the emotions that they're feeling are absolutely appropriate and justified, but that there is a solution and that there is something that we can do. That's hope. Optimism is not warranted. Hope is really what we need to give people. And the way that you start by making the connection to other people such that they can be hope is to say, I know you're afraid, and look, I'm not going to kid you. I'm afraid too. But here's the good news. There's a lot that we can do, and we're going to do it. And here's what we're going to do. Let's go, team. Right now, what did I do with? I led with my weakness, because my weakness connected me to you. That's really important. It's funny, you'll talk. I was doing Oprah Winfrey's show the week before last, her Super Soul podcast. She's incredibly great. I mean, she's a brilliant interviewer, and she was literally quoting my book to me by memory to me. It was unbelievable. But, the one thing that we kept talking about was how weaknesses with other people make them open up. The defenselessness, Brene Brown calls it vulnerability, but I think defenselessness is maybe even better, because the opposite is defensiveness. And defensiveness is a way for you to protect yourself from people seeing your weaknesses. Defenselessness connects people to you, and you say, look, yeah, your kid dropped out of college. So did I. And my parents were upset. And, frankly, I remember when my cohort of guys I went to high school with were starting to graduate from college, and I didn't even have one semester under my belt. I was pretty bummed out. And I know how it feels, is the bottom line. But it can be okay.
Yeah. I'm getting this picture, Arthur, of like DNA. We spend a lot of time thinking of this DNA strand and Clifton Strengths, right? That's kind of kind of a graphic we put on our site. But almost like you almost need some weakness receptacles for those other individuals' strengths receptacles to connect into, right? You almost need to get community. You almost need that to kind of happen in a way. And if you're hiding those receptacles, you're never going to make that connection. Does that sound?
For sure. And it also has some very practical implications to it as well. So because I know my Clifton strengths, and you could say I know my Clifton, they always sort of like lesser strengths, also AKA weaknesses, right? It's like numbers 30, 31, 32, 33, and 34. They're all about administration. They're all about management. They're all about, being organized. And I'm not a disaster, but that's not what I can't do. It's what I don't like to do. That's what the weaknesses really are under the circumstances. Why is that important for me to know? Because like I got a company. I'm a teacher, but I have a company on the side, and my company is on teaching happiness to people, giving speeches, helping executives, helping teams become more effective with the science of happiness. To run that company, I got to have a CEO, and it better not be me. Why do I know that? Because I know my weaknesses. How do I know my weaknesses? Because I did Clifton Strengths. And so in other words, you got to coach people on how they can remediate their own weaknesses. And in so doing, they can be happier by doing that as well. Don't spend time saying, oh, I'm so bummed out because I'm not good at these things. Find somebody to do it, for Pete's sake, to the extent that you possibly can. Build a team. And by the way, love the team. The worst executives, what they all have in common is they try to find people with their strengths portfolio, with their same strengths profile, and they don't value people who don't have those strengths. That's exactly the wrong thing to do. My CEO, her name is Candace. She's phenomenal. She's like, her strengths are my 5 weaknesses. I'm so happy. I spend the day happy because I don't have to worry about that stuff.
I love it. The one of the guiding principles, one of our principles of strengths-based sort of development is that people need one another, right? And that this idea that I can acknowledge I'm great at some things and there are some things I'm terrible at, right? You just walk through yours. I know Jim has talked at length about some of his as well. And being able to own what you're not great at, right? So that you can then broadcast to the people around you where you need help and what that help can look like. I think we talk about that at length. I'm not sure we've talked about it through the lens of how it can actually just make you happier.
Yeah.
To be able to do that. I love that as an additional layer to the strengths-based development lens here, that it's not just more effective. It's not just going to create better outcomes, but my goodness, you'll be happier in the process.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about Clifton Strengths is like, there's nothing wrong with admitting them on the weakness side. It's not like ordinary. It's like, let me tell you, I got a problem. I'm just going to lay it out on the line. I shoplift. I mean, no, fix that. If that's your strength, if that's your weakness, it's like, I'm unfaithful to my wife. Don't do that. That's the wrong thing to do. Don't embrace that. But that's not what the weaknesses really is in the Clifton Strengths approach. It's about the things that you're not on your genome. They're not the things that you're naturally gifted at. And so those are the things that you need people around you, not to remediate, but to actually complete you. And that's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. Love it.
Teresa's got a good question. I think she says, what about levels of happiness in faith, family, friendship, and work? Do they all have to be going great, or are there different levels of happiness in one or the other?
So the happiest people, they have balance and abundance across the 4. That's one of the things that we find. Now, that does not mean that all 4 are going great all the time. It just means that you're spending time paying attention to those things, that you're investing across those 4 things. I mean, I know a lot of people who are, really they're struggling with family life, for example. I mean, that's, you ever had teenage kids? You're struggling. I mean, unless you have some weird outlier, kid. But I remember when my kids I had 3 kids in high school at once, and it was, I mean, my middle son, thank God for the U.S. Marine Corps, because he's all good now. But it was tricky, man. I mean, it was so bad for a while that we were at the principal's office, his grades were just so bad. And we were leaving, and my wife says, well, at least we know he's not cheating, and it was, I'm telling you, I mean, I was not low on the investment on the family side. I was low on the success on the family side, or so it seemed at the time, but I was making the investments. And ultimately it's where you're putting your heart and where you're investing. That's in the long term where you're going to get your enjoyment, your satisfaction, and meaning. So you have to keep investing in the same way, by the way, if you've got an investment portfolio guy, and this who's investing your 401k. And like I talk to my guy, these days, it's like we're bleeding all over the place in the stock market. And I say, it's awful. And he says, what are you talking about? It's an opportunity to buy stock cheap. Well, when your kid is failing out of math, that's your opportunity to invest in family. You're buying stock cheap. Your value investing is the bottom line.
We just came out of a situation where my daughter, spent 4 years in college, and she needs to spend some more time in college. In her mind, there's a little bit of a failure there, and I always just kind of said, you know what, we'll get through this. It's going to be fine. Like,
yeah, tell her to call me. Tell her to call me. If she's getting out before 30, she's doing good.
Hey, we'll make it through. I have no worries there. Teresa asks a good follow-up question. She says, do you find generational differences between people who are willing to own their weaknesses versus trying to fix their weaknesses? We often, boomers and Xers often get the hammer end of this, where millennials and zillennials maybe get let off the hook. I just made a broad generalization. I don't know. What do you think about that?
No, it's interesting, and it's as they say, your results may vary. It really depends on the person and the family. And so I see a lot of young people who are trying to hide their weaknesses in a very, very big way. I know a lot of older people. It's actually in a weird way, it comes off more off-puttingly for older people when they're trying to hide their weaknesses. You can't hide them very well. people kind of know. And it's like, it's, if I got, trying to do something about this little weakness up here, most likely you'd know, and it wouldn't reflect that great on me necessarily. And so I think that it's important that we embrace them at any age is the bottom line. And at the same time, if it's something that's holding us back, to remediate them to the extent that we can in an open way, in a humble way, and in a loving way as well. Also, asking for help is really critically important. Now, you're going to get to a certain point in your life where certain things are not going to be remediated, and you just laugh about it. I mean, it's like, my hearing isn't as good as it used to be because I was a professional musician for a long time. And so, I say to I'm teaching in a mask all semester, and the kids, I got 90 of them looking at me, and they'll put up their hand. I'll call them. They'll be like this. I'm like, you got to speak up. I'm old and deaf, and so I could remediate that by getting a whole bunch of apparatuses, but it's actually just as easy to own the weakness for now, at least. It's not connecting me to them because they don't have the same weakness, but you get my point.
Yeah. Wow. So as we sort of round the corner here and come to the last couple minutes of our conversation, I want to maybe ask one final question about maybe the setting where we currently are societally and sort of in the world. So many things happening. We have a global community of coaches sort of around the world. When you think about the concept of happiness and playing to our strengths, what sort of balance, if there is any, is there between like the things you can control, maybe those 4 things in the investment you make there, and all the things that may be happening around you and in the world at large? I've got high positivity, right? It's really tough for me sometimes to watch the news and constantly see bad, sad, negative stories about things that are happening. What's the relationship there between things in your control and maybe dealing with those things outside of your sphere of control?
Well, to begin with, spend as much time on things that are in your control as possible. This is a basic happiness lesson. I tell people, for example, there's an excessive obsession with the info news entertainment complex in America today. Most people don't know who their school superintendent is, but they know the inner workings of Congress. And so they're throwing stuff at their cable TV channel in the evening. And that's a mistake, because what the cable TV channel is trying to do is they're trying to spike your dopamine. And in so doing, they can get better ad revenue, and they're managing you under those circumstances around something over which you don't have very much control. Be an informed citizen, but you can be an informed citizen on 15 minutes a day of information total about politics and 30 minutes a day total of news. Now, if you want more than that, be careful, because that easily turns into a dopamine fixation, because you're actually getting this, getting the hormones that you kind of like. And what's happening is being annoyed, being angry, throwing stuff at the TV, being contemptuous with what's going on. It is going to be satisfying a little bit of an addiction, or on social media it can be even worse, by the way. The trouble is, it's not going to make you happy. You need to manage your feelings so your feelings don't manage you vis-a-vis your dopaminergic pathways, is what I'm talking about. So pay attention to the things you can. If you really want to get involved in policy and public policy and politics, get involved in locally as much as you possibly can. That's really important. And the second thing is be paying attention to the stuff that's most local of all. I can't tell you how many people are paying attention to, President Biden, but not their own kids. That's a really big mistake. And I realize that it's funny, and also, by the way, I'm talking to people all the time who are more involved in making money than they are in the kids. That's the workaholics dilemma, but that's a different version of more or less the same kind of scale of what's going on. Pay attention to the people and the love closest to you.
Brilliant.
It's really good advice. It's really hard. It's really good advice. Yeah. In as part of on your website, you've got a resource that's available, a reading group guide. You encourage groups to get together in this, and as part of it, there's a bunch of questions that folks can download. I did that today. It doesn't even require an email address. You're missing a huge opportunity for spam there. I just thought I'd tell you that. But how do you envision, as you think about these coaches, any additional thoughts? Like, you've got some resource guides here, but how could they use this book in their coaching to help individuals on things we haven't talked about yet?
So what I would recommend, for given that we're inside the Gallup and Clifton families here, what I would recommend is thinking in a more creative way, with more expertise than, by the way, that I have, because I'm not a Clifton's coach. I'm a Clifton client. But for the Clifton coaches who really know the strengths inside and out, know how to use it, know how to give people guidance, the book should be helpful for thinking about people and their strengths at different points in their leadership careers. So in other words, this book can help to create a little bit more granularity about how you're coaching people at different ages. So you have a 35-year-old client, it's going to be very different than if you have a 55-year-old client. The 35-year-old client is going to be guided toward all using their Clifton strengths maximally to increase their fluid intelligence, to leverage their fluid intelligence. At 55, it's moving them onto their crystallized intelligence curve. There's a lot about how to do that in this book, but I didn't interact it with the Clifton strengths. This community is going to be uniquely able to take this book and actually say, okay, what does crystallized intelligence look like? And how am I going to do a Clifton strengths profile that suits somebody uniquely who's 55 or 60 as opposed to 25 or 30?
Awesome. Austin, we're at the end of our time. Can you take a second and thank Dr. Brooks for joining us today?
I absolutely can, Dr. Arthur. Jim and I were so excited. We've been messaging back and forth for weeks as we've gotten ready for this. Thank you for bringing not only your expertise to the conversation, but the obvious passion and example you set of what it looked like to be happy and love what you're doing. And the courage of sort of sharing some of your stories of your career and your experiences. On behalf of the entire Clifton Strengths community of 13,000 coaches globally, we thank you for spending time with us, and hopefully look forward to talking to you more in the future as we put into practice some of the great things you shared with us today. Really, sincerely.
Thanks, Austin. Thanks to all the Clifton coaches. You're doing good things for the world. You're making your living by lifting people up and making them more effective, and quite frankly, making them happier as well. We can all use more of that.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the greatest privileges we have at Gallup is we've got these great senior scientists like you that we get to hear from all the time. And what a privilege we got to spend some time one-on-one with you in some time just for us. And so Arthur, thanks for doing that. Thanks for being worried about being happy. I think we've got a lot of opportunities there with people around the world. I hear from them all the time. And what a great reminder here to really focus on that. Again, the book, From Strength to Strength, it's available. I put the website and the link in the chat. Folks can go out there and take a look at it. We'll make sure we include the link to that as well in the show notes. With that, we'll remind everyone to take full advantage of all these resources. We've been talking about Clifton Strengths here in this session. Out at gallup.com/Clifton Strengths, just log in. There's a resource tab. Just about everything you can think of is there. For coaching, master coaching, or if you want to become a Gallup certified strengths coach, send us an email, coaching@gallup.com, an easy way for us to get some information back to you on that. You can join us in our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/called to coach. I'm sure this conversation is going to spark up there over the next couple days, and I'd love to engage in that conversation for you. And of course, find us everywhere just by searching Clifton Strengths, all one word, on any social platform, and we'll be there for you. We want to thank you for joining us today. If you listen to us live, thanks for coming out live, and thanks for your questions. If you're listening to the podcast, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.